Russia is once again calling for negotiations in Istanbul.
Among other absolutely essential and necessary conditions for regulation, such as the process of demilitarization, there are also demands for denazification.
The Serbian president has revealed the Kremlin's plans. Europe is preparing for war.
A full-scale war between Russia and Europe could begin in just 3 to 4 years. And it's not a politician from Brussels saying this, but an ally of Moscow.
Putin is receiving guests. Apparently, it's the last hope to find friends.
This is how the president of Kazakhstan was welcomed in Moscow. Banners with his image appeared on the streets of the Russian capital.
Trump was inspired by Russia and now wants to celebrate every possible victory day.
But from this point forward, we will celebrate Victory Day in World War II. And frankly, in all other wars as well.
But strangely enough, Russia is facing a shortage of Russians. Expect reinforcements.
Putin is officially inviting Indians. Moscow and New Delhi are preparing a mobility pact that will drastically change the Russian labor market.
Faith in God serves Putin. The internet is the new enemy.
Addiction to the internet, to social networks, when a person's heart is there and not with Christ.
The future of the Russian Federation is in safe hands. The debut presentation of the alcoholic robot.
And right now, let's talk about how ready Russians are for negotiations with Ukraine. It seems someone has seriously scared Putin, and this is serious. At the same time, Peskov is having a fit, saying that Europe, it turns out, is ready to go to war with Russia. Well, yes, and why not? But really, who is the aggressor? That's the main question. Besides that, friends, we'll discuss in the segment how Russia is losing an ally. That ally is Kazakhstan. Tokayev met with Trump, and after that he met with Putin. And this is where things didn't go according to plan. Let's figure out exactly how in the segment, and afterwards all the important international questions await you in the studio. We'll be discussing it right now. Let's go.
The armed forces are eliminating a huge number of occupiers in Pokrovsk and in Donetsk, in a key settlement that supports the entire Pokrovsk Myrnohrad agglomeration from the east. Ukrainian tank crews crushed the Russian invaders to rubble.
Reports like these from Pokrovsk, the hottest spot in Donbass, are coming in literally every day. October has already become the bloodiest month of the entire war for the Russian group. However, November seems poised to break even that record. The colossal efforts of the defense forces have resulted in record losses for Russia. And as a consequence, there is a new mobilization, though for now it remains hidden.
This term should be understood to mean several things. It refers to recruiting conscripts for contracts, as well as enlisting reservists to guard important facilities, which the Russians have announced in many regions. This is a sign that the current flow of contract soldiers in Russia has decreased. The recruitment of foreigners also does not make up for the losses in battle.
The Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation claims that Pokrovsk has become the site of incredible Russian losses. According to reports from Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky, in their attempt to occupy this city, more than 30,000 occupiers have already lost their lives. And their number is growing every day.
The fact that Pokrovsk has turned into yet another meat grinder for the Russian occupiers is undeniable. And in general, it is important to note that no one is actually hiding the fact that the overall concept, not the specific strategy of Ukraine's defense forces, is in essence to undermine the enemy's offensive potential, to inflict as much damage as possible so that they lack the strength to continue and expand their offensive, so that these infiltrations do not turn into breakthroughs of our defenses.
As always, the Kremlin decided to solve the issue through deception. Officially, they are not announcing mobilization, but in reality, they are rounding up literally everyone. Everyone the security forces and the military can get their hands on.
What does this draft signify? Hellish raids that ignore all deferments, all supporting documents, basically anything at all. And these hellish raids are happening not only in Moscow, but now also in the regions. There are already reports of raids in Kazan and Khabarovsk. This is alarming, this is bad, because raids in Moscow and Makhachkala are one thing, but raids in cities with 1 million people are something else entirely. This means that now they will simply cover the entire territory as best they can, with police catching all men of conscription age wherever they are.
At the same time, the previous rule that conscripts don't fight at the front is now a thing of the past. Now, the year-round draft that has been announced provides the army with a constant influx of people. First and foremost for recruitment, which by the way is carried out everywhere by force.
This is the signing of contracts through pressure, let's put it that way, emotional pressure. When conscripts are called up, they already end up in the barracks. And there is a lot of it. Hazing still exists in the Russian army to this day. We've already forgotten what that's like. So you have to apply considerable pressure on this new recruit in order to ensure compliance and force him to sign a contract that way. And then he is no longer a conscript, but a contract soldier. And as is well known, contract soldiers can be sent by Russian law directly to the front line.
Russian human rights activists say that the methods in Russia haven't changed, but the scale of such contract signings has increased dramatically. If before these were just local initiatives, now the order has come from above to forcibly keep as many people in the army as possible.
This hidden mobilization is ongoing. It's not just starting now. I repeat, it never stopped. It's been going on since the fall of 2022. It's just a new phase of it now.
Another method invented by the Russian military machine is to call up reservists to guard strategic facilities. Analysts explain that this scheme is designed for the gradual deployment to the front of everyone who has ever been connected to the army. To start with, these reservists will replace the current convoys, whose fate is already sealed.
In this way, the state can take the contract soldiers who are currently in Region N, send them to the front, and instead regularly rotate reservists in their place. 2 months, 2 months, 2 months. That is, the training camps they will hold for reservists are specifically for guarding these facilities. And
after several rotations, those very reservists will be sent to the front, and if there's time, they'll undergo field military training. If Russia's losses do not decrease, the briefing will take place right on the bus on the way to the war. Putin needs an uninterrupted supply of cannon fodder.
The enemy has thrown literally everything it has at Pokrovsk. But they continue to suffer such devastating losses there that even a numerical advantage of up to 20 times in some areas does not allow them to take control of the city.
Friends, we will definitely talk about Pokrovsk in the near future, but for now, let's start with an equally important topic. This is the bipolar disorder of the Kremlin's power. We're discussing it with Taras Zahorodny, a political technologist. Taras, hello, we're glad to see you.
Yes, hello.
So, let's talk about this. It seems the Russians are once again ready to return to the Istanbul format. The acting chargé d'affaires of Russia in Turkey, Alexei Ivanov, announced this, and now they're supposedly waiting for a signal from Ukraine to start negotiations. At the same time, Peskov claims that Europe is preparing to go to war with Russia. He allegedly agrees with the statement made by Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, who was the first to say that Europe is preparing to launch military aggression against Moscow. Tell me, please, is any of this even worth paying attention to, and what here can be believed or not?
Well, in this case, you should believe all of it. When the Russians talk about wanting to continue the Istanbul format, nothing has changed there. They want to discuss how Ukraine should reduce its army and give up heavy weaponry, not produce missiles, carry out denazification and demilitarization. That is based on that piece of paper they drew up for themselves back in 1922. There's nothing new here.
Okay, but regarding the war with Europe, why is Peskov pushing this narrative right now? Are they preparing for an invasion or not? I mean, are the Russians looking for a pretext for themselves or what?
Well, they're trying to... Right now, the issue of the reparations loan is being decided, and they're trying to intimidate Europe, and that only Europe will be fighting. Finally, it's become clear to Europe that Russia will be fighting against them, so it's better to give money to Ukraine. At least Ukraine has no problem striking targets on Russian Federation territory. No one is going to investigate what kind of drones are flying into Ukrainian territory. That's why they're trying with all their might to stop this process. And they're also trying to halt Europe's military rearmament, shouting that they'll strike at Europe. But the problem for the Russians is that now Europe has Ukraine on its side.
Okay, but then what about Aleksandar Vučić, the president of Serbia, who said that Serbia is also preparing to invade Russia? How should we even interpret that? I'm looking at his quote. He says that this whole prospect is becoming more and more obvious.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Well, that's a rather cunning position. You shouldn't take everything at face value. This means that they are basically ready to sell weapons. They had, in fact, already been selling weapons to Europe before this. They pretended not to understand why Europe needed more Soviet-made weapons. And they turned a blind eye to how those weapons ended up in Ukraine. That's the first point. Second, well, Serbia is kind of like a mini Russia after all. Now they're going to be building up their army, possibly to threaten their neighbors as well. So that's the way we should look at it.
Okay, let's talk about other allies of Russia, whose alliance is not entirely clear-cut. Kazakhstan. Tokayev was in Washington complimenting Trump, and Trump was complimenting Tokayev. Moreover, Kazakhstan and the US signed a memorandum on cooperation in the field of critical minerals. So the US administration really loves signing something about minerals these days. And Kazakhstan maintains active political ties with the US. Here's what was said in their joint communiqué as a result. It's important to note the following. That's how things are in the Kremlin today. Could you please tell us what this trip was for, and overall, what do you think of Tokayev's visit to the Kremlin? What are the outcomes?
It is quite clear that President Putin is actively trying to somehow hold on to his steadily waning and diminishing influence and power in the strategically important region of Central Asia, where countries such as China, Turkey, and the United States are all now becoming increasingly more active and involved. But this is more of a courtesy visit. When Tokayev was at the White House, he demonstrated the highest level of diplomatic skill while speaking with Trump. He began his speech by saying, you were sent to us by the heavens. And there were other such flowery, almost poetic compliments, so ornate and Eastern in style, that it infuriated many Russians who said, you never spoke to Putin like that. It's clear that Kazakhstan is now also holding up shipments that are headed to Russia. This is contraband passing through their territory. They're restricting the export of oil, or more precisely oil products, because they need them for themselves. In short, they're showing that it's still unclear who should be chasing after whom here. This is a very important region of Central Asia for the Russians because in geopolitics it's called the heartland. The heartland, which allows for control over processes in Eurasia. And that's why when Kazakhstan signed a lot of agreements with the United States, I think Russia's worst nightmare right now is the appearance of US military bases in Central Asia. It's not out of the question, by the way, that this could happen in Kazakhstan. At the very least, I saw that there have been proposals from Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan indicating that they are ready to host American troops on their territory. As for Kazakhstan, we'll see. But I think if such circumstances arise, things there will be far from simple.
So if we try to sum it up briefly, how do you see the current situation for the stronger states, let's say, of the former CIS? Or more precisely, the CIS in its current form, how would you assess the effectiveness of their cooperation without the Kremlin? For example, take Tokayev and Erdogan. Are they managing to resolve their issues perfectly well without Putin's involvement? Is this horizontal cooperation gradually forming between them?
Of course, it is forming, especially as Russia weakens with its military potential and influence declining, and its ability to continue acting in the territory of Central Asian countries diminishing. Naturally, these centrifugal processes will continue.
Okay, I want to talk to you about an article that was published in the American magazine Foreign Affairs. The author of this piece is someone named Watling. Could you please tell me what you think about it? He says that Russia has 3 stages through which it wants to subjugate. Let's put it that way. Well, yes, probably to conquer Ukraine after all. The first stage is occupation, the destruction of a sufficient amount of Ukrainian territory, so that, according to the author, the viability of the remaining unoccupied part would only be possible with Moscow's consent. The second stage is the use of economic and political levers, backed by the threat of a renewed invasion, to establish control over the authorities. And the third and final stage is that Russia brings Ukraine into its orbit, similar to Belarus. He did emphasize, to be fair, that Russia is still far from even the first stage, that is, Let me remind you, the occupation and destruction of enough Ukrainian territory to satisfy the Russians. Nevertheless, the plan looks extremely maximalist. It's clear that in the West, people like to read something intriguing. And what do you think of this kind of reading material? Does it have anything in common with reality?
Well, I get the feeling that the gentleman expert brought up these Russia's plans, the ones they were drawing up for themselves 10 years ago and even 5 years ago, about how they would occupy Ukraine and use that to intimidate the West. But of course, the situation now is completely different. Of course, they want to, but the intensity of Ukraine's strikes on Russian territory shows that, to put it mildly, it's still unclear where and whose plans will actually be carried out. And will you even live to see such a wonderful time when you at least come to the middle of the first stage? So yes, and there are those who are further away, like in that joke, God grant that your wishes match your own capabilities.
Absolutely. Now, there's something else I want to ask you. In Russia, they've come up with an interesting method of covert mobilization. They offer volunteers the chance to supposedly guard strategic facilities, basically to stand watch, let's say, near oil refineries. But in reality, they send them to the front. We're talking about a similar recruitment of volunteers, reservist units, who are actually being sent to Ukraine. Do you think this kind of tactic will help the Kremlin succeed in recruiting manpower?
Well, look, they've always tried to avoid this, specifically in this kind of format. So obviously this is a direct result of Ukraine's strikes and the shrinking of their economy, because there are fewer and fewer opportunities to buy people. And that's why they've switched to a conditionally free resource, these reservists and everyone else. At first, for example, they were paying them 2 million rubles each, but now many regions have reduced it to 800,000. And some have even canceled the payments altogether because there's no money left. And that's why they're moving to Plan B, which in principle the Kremlin hadn't planned to implement. Because after all, they understood that the first wave of mobilization resulted in a certain degree of irritation among Russians. And a second wave would confirm that President Putin is losing the war. And that's why they're coming up with these hybrid methods, not calling it mobilization, but doing certain things to quell discontent, because there is discontent. But there's another question here. What is it related to? It's related to, due to the fact that there was a significant and noticeable wave of business takeovers in Russia carried out by Putin's inner circle. This means that now people need to be taken out of the civilian economy from enterprises that already belong to Putin's close associates. This could raise questions about whether they will give up these people because they need them themselves. So they're not doing this out of a good situation, but they will try to do it. Let's see how it works out. Thank you very much.
Taras Zagorodny, political technologist, was on the air of Ukraine today. All the best to you, Taras. Goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye.